a man is found dead in a ditch, stabbed and dressed in women's clothes. 2 others are found nearby. Over the course of just 10 days, 2 more fall victim to random knife attacks. To everyone's surprise, the killer is a young woman. Joanna Dennehy has spent years in and out of juvenile detention, prison and psychiatric units. She's a drug addict, alcoholic and known to be violent. Dennehy's violent behaviour escalates, culminating in a killing spree in which she murders 3 men over a 10-day period. Were there red flags in her early teens that were missed? And could these tragic murders have been prevented? 1 in 5 murders in the UK is now committed by an ex-prisoner. From serial rapists,
he harboured dark thoughts about carrying out sexual offences,
to convicted killers.
They'd met in prison, they were out on the streets together.
Free to walk amongst us.
They knew he could have killed again.
Free to murder innocent people.
She stabbed him many times, and then she hid him in a wheelie bin.
I'm Donald McIntyre, and I'm examining how such tragedies happen. Who's to blame? Is it the justice system? Or are these killers just pure evil?
She gained pleasure from hurting people.
And ultimately, could an innocent life have been saved? This is Release to Kill. Joanna Dennehy was born in St Albans, Hertfordshire in 1982. She grew up with her mom, dad and younger sister.
I know that her father was a security worker and her mother worked in groceries.
Joanna did well in school.
She was a very bright, talented, driven individual, and her family had high hopes for her.
But at 13, the young teenager's life takes a darker path when she starts dating a man 5 years older, John Traynor. Her parents put a stop to the relationship, but she regularly runs away from home to join her boyfriend. Her school grades plummet. One afternoon, her parents are called to the school after she turns up drunk and burns her books.
She seemed to get involved in drugs and alcohol and just start mixing with the wrong crowd.
Joanna continues her relationship with her older boyfriend, and at just 15, she leaves home for the last time, never to return.
She ran away with a 20-year-old man. The relationship was sexual, an older man, and using drugs and alcohol. Why is that? What was she seeking?
Dennehy and Traynor moved to Milton Keynes. She becomes estranged from her parents and younger sister, and at only 17, she gives birth to a daughter. But the young couple already has problems.
There was a lack of maternal instinct, or a different maternal instinct to what we would typically see as the norm.
The relationship with Traynor is stormy. She cheats on him with both men and women. By this time, Dennehy is chronically addicted to drugs and alcohol. She would leave home for days or weeks, only to return and ask for forgiveness. During this period, she has her first run-in with the law. A burglary conviction leads to a sentence in a secure unit.
As a boy, I was in young offender prisons. There's a lot of bravado about being a prolific criminal or a serious criminal even. And I mean, that's one of the sad things about our young prisoner system, is that they're like gladiator schools, and it's about who's the toughest, who's the hardest. They're very difficult places.
Having her freedom taken away doesn't deter Dennehy. She goes on to commit further minor offences.
The period of time when you can make an influence. I've worked with sort of young offenders, so 18 to 21, and that's the time when you need to work to try to break that cycle of offending.
Looking for a fresh start, John Traynor persuades Dennehy to move to East Anglia. But a change of scene doesn't work. With her growing addiction to drink and drugs, her behaviour continues to deteriorate, and John eventually leaves. The couple separate for 18 months, during which time Dennehy spends further time in youth offender prison. At this point, she's committing relatively minor offences and doesn't receive any mental health treatment.
She was under the age of 25, and best practice would suggest that we don't make any kind of diagnosis of personality disorder under the age of 25 because our personalities are continuing to develop. And particularly if we're thinking about impulsive personality traits such as sexual promiscuity at a young age, violence, those things decrease as we age.
When Dennehy is 23, she and her partner John get back together and have a second daughter. Sadly, their relationship doesn't improve. Dennehy starts self-harming and etches a homemade tattoo under her right eye. When she was drunk, she would kick and punch her partner, and worryingly, this is when she starts to carry a knife.
When Joanna Dennehy started showing signs of violence towards him, he instinctively became worried for his children. That's when he decided to leave because he couldn't risk putting the children in harm's way.
John Traynor leaves Dennehy in 2007 and takes their 2 girls with him. Now alone and homeless, things go from bad to worse for her. She drifts from address to address, stealing and sometimes turning to sex work.
She turned to some unsavoury methods of gaining money to help feed some of her addiction issues, which then led her down a potentially darker path.
Joanna Dennehy has spiralled out of control since her mid-teens. She's abusing drugs and alcohol regularly, and her violence has escalated to such a point that her partner has left and taken their children with him. Professor Taj Nathan, a forensic psychiatrist, and Vanessa Frake, a retired prison governor, join me in the Crime Hub to discuss the case. So Joanna Dennehy, what strikes me as significant, particularly later on, is that she was a super bright kid. Now, of course, with all of that comes a different skill set. So she seemed to be reasonably manipulative, bullying. She seemed to be, evolve into petty crime. And it's quite an unusual trajectory because she had a pretty stable home life.
Yes, and that does make it unusual. So the typical pattern of offenders who may start to offend in their teenage years is that there are often difficulties in the home life and problems in the environment they're living. Those factors weren't present in this case.
So there was some suggestion that she recognised in her early teens that she was different to other people.
I think she commented that she felt that she may have been the black sheep of the family. So that may have been a recognition that there was something different, a recognition in herself that there was something different about her.
She gets a boyfriend and runs off with him. And it seems to me this is the critical juncture. This is when she actually leaves her family behind, and this is the first major move in her life.
Yes, absolutely. I think it shows the character that Joanna Dennehy is. She's very strong-willed, strong-minded, but, for a woman, a young woman at this stage, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The fact that she wanted to be with somebody older is interesting, but understandably, at this stage, there's no sort of red flag flying.
This may be the early signs of her acting on the need for excitement, and there's a sense of some recklessness, but I would agree, at this stage, it doesn't appear outside what would be expected for someone who's getting involved in offending.
The discussion around her drug use while in her adolescence. I mean, lots of adolescents use drugs. It doesn't mean that it would necessarily provoke a rehab course.
When she came into prison on the first occasion, they would have gone through risk assessments with her and asked her about her drug taking. Did she take drugs? If so, what drugs did she take?
At what level of drug use would somebody be offered, an intervention?
Any level. But again, if she doesn't engage in it, it's not going to happen.
I think that her drug use is likely to be another reflection of her sensation-seeking, so her thrill-seeking behaviour. So she is likely to have seen that as a positive aspect of her life, not something that caused problems that she required treatment for.
We're now hearing testimony that she is being rather violent in her relationship with John. Clearly, if she was violent at home, she was clearly violent elsewhere. But I'm wondering if society's reaction to crimes of violence by women suggested that they weren't dealt with as seriously as they should have been.
Social services didn't really look into the violence against the partner, the threat to the children, etc., because, as we know, women are in the main nurturers and carers, and it's not the violence that she portrays isn't of the norm. She's very violent. It appears when she's drunk, often attacking John. She's taken to carrying a knife, a dagger in her boot.
And in view of what we know about her future offending, this seems to me the very first window into her real amplified potential for violence.
The concern I would have, the particular concern would be carrying a knife. What psychological purpose did that serve for her? It could have been part of a display, to display the threat that she presents. It could have also represented a fascination with violence and with weapons.
She has 2 children. We're condensing some years here, but essentially her criminality and that kind of behaviour doesn't change.
No, in fact, it escalates to a certain degree. She became abusive to her partner. She then got convicted of theft and spent some more time in prison.
When her partner, her boyfriend, took advantage of her time in prison to take the kids away, she didn't seem too distressed.
No, she didn't. I think the evidence suggests that she didn't have the expected emotional response to that event.
I think at this stage she's come to a crossroads, and at this stage it's which way Joanna decides to go. Does she go left to turn her life around, or does she go right down the wrong path?
Dennehy soon goes back to her old friends and social haunts, but could she stay out of trouble? Joanna Dennehy is now 30, single, and living in Peterborough. Her violent behaviour is a way of life, and in 2012, she's given a 12-month community order for assault causing bodily harm and owning a dangerous dog. She's now under the care of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Probation Service, which should have been making sure she wasn't committing crime. Unfortunately, the department had just adopted a government plan called Transforming Rehabilitation.
Now, under Transforming Rehabilitation, offenders were divided into 3 levels: medium, low, but high as well. Now, high risk was seen by National Probation Service, and they were given a much more serious level of support and oversight.
Joanna Dennehy was classified as low to medium risk.
The medium and low-level cases were overseen by the private sector probation officers who had higher caseloads. They may not be as qualified. I'm not belittling the work that they did, but there was a different level of expectation.
A later investigation reveals that the probation officer assigned to her wasn't experienced enough to deal with the complexities of Dennehy's offending. Nothing was done about her regularly missing appointments. She's slipping through the cracks in the system. Dennehy continues to offend. Later that year, she's convicted of theft and sent back to Peterborough Prison. While in prison, the authorities recognise that she's no ordinary addict. For the first time, her mental health issues are addressed. She undergoes psychological testing at Peterborough City Hospital and is diagnosed with a personality disorder.
There are many, many treatments available for that, and treatments that have a good impact. We're looking at individualised psychotherapies, and that just is not readily available in prison, but I would suggest was entirely what she needed at the time.
For the first time, there's a diagnosis of serious mental issues. Dennehy also has a long history of violence linked to a string of convictions. But when her sentence comes to an end, she's prescribed medication to regulate her moods and released back onto the streets.
We can think of it like a plaster on a gunshot wound. It might cover the hole and you might not see the bleeding for a little while, but underneath that, the person's wound is increasing, you're bleeding out, everything's getting worse, but you just can't quite see it.
she got convicted and was returned to Peterborough Prison, where significantly, for the very first time, she came under the umbrella of some mental health professionals.
So she was admitted to a psychiatric unit very briefly and there received a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. It's an unusual diagnosis to apply to a female, so I think it's showing some indicator that she's at the top end of the offending group.
How do you think she would have regarded and engaged with that diagnosis?
I don't think she would necessarily have been desperate to seek an understanding of what the problems were in her, because I don't think she would have recognised there were problems. She may have recognised that she was different.
Do you think there may even have been a suggestion that she would have been relieved that confirmation that she was different, but perhaps more significantly, more likely that she used this as a badge of honour?
Absolutely, yes. I think that there is a distinct possibility of that. And also that she enjoyed being different and the shock factor that went with it.
So there doesn't appear to be any suggestion that there was an intervention which was missed, a lost opportunity that might have halted her criminality?
At this stage, no, I wouldn't say that there was.
So in the fact that she had no conviction for violence, and she was clearly violent already at that stage, suggests, one, society's response to violence from women and maybe underwhelming response, or two, she was manipulative and sharp enough to talk her way out of it.
Yes, I'd agree. So even if that had come to the attention of authorities, then there's a possibility that she may have giving the impression that, that was just in the context of a difficult relationship, and there was not a likelihood of violence elsewhere.
It's interesting that you say that in therapy or in assessments, that at one level she'd be super manipulative. Do you think part of her manipulative skill set would be to shock and to challenge and also tell the truth and maybe a bit more?
So I think the evidence is that she was prone to lie and that she was prone to exaggerate.
It seems to me there's a pattern here. She can control people with her charisma, her intellect, and of course, always a threat of violence.
Yes, absolutely. I think always in the background now we're seeing the violence simmering away gently. I think it's interesting that she feels so comfortable in prison because actually on the outside she's now got nothing. She has no partner, she has no children, she has no family ties, she has no home. So everything that she's got is now in the prison.
With her antisocial personality disorder, her intellect, the threat of violence, and her charisma, that is a heady and rather dangerous cocktail in one individual.
It is. She's certainly on a pathway to serious offending with violence. The extent of that, I think, is difficult to tell at this stage.
Now out of prison, Dennehy is once again under the supervision of the probation service. This time they assess her as having the potential to cause serious harm. But this doesn't lead to them carrying out any further risk assessment. They place her in a shared house for vulnerable people owned by landlord Kevin Lee. No one could have predicted the shocking events that would take place there.
I think it was 2013, after a relationship breakdown, I moved into a shared house, one of Kev's. And then all of a sudden, this Joanna came on the scene. She was just a bit, how do I put her? To be honest with you, she was quiet the first day. Nothing. And I'm like, well, you seem quite timid. Day two, you'd think she owned the house.
Dennehy wastes no time making friends with her landlord and concocts a story about her past. She lies to Kevin Lee, telling him she killed her father, who abused her as a child.
She said to people that I had a good childhood over than what my dad did. She's like, I had to get him away from my mum and my sister.
Her lying regarding her father abusing her, I would want to know what she felt she was trying to achieve through that. Who was she trying to hurt? Was she trying to get care and attention because she felt that she would be more likely to get support and emotional warmth from others if she was a sexual abuse victim?
Kevin Lee takes pity on her, even giving her a job that fits her aggressive talents perfectly.
She was basically being a bailiff for him, if you like. He'd hired her to evict people illegally from his properties. She'd go around banging on the doors, threatening them, and that's how they were doing it.
She might have scared the tenants, but Kevin Lee, a married man with 2 children, has fallen under Dennehy's spell, and they soon end up in a sexual relationship.
She would nudge him, she'd pinch his bum, and she'd be like, I'll see to you later, and carry on being a naughty boy. And I'm like, well, if she's that open, does she know he's got a wife?
As Tony Ann gets to know Dennehy, she's increasingly disturbed by her aggressive and violent moods.
She liked to brag that she's a prison bird, and she used to say, I've been in prison, don't test me. And then she'd say things like me. She's like, you think I'm flirting with these men, but I've been in prison, I'll take you as well.
The 2 women share the house with 2 men. One is John Chapman, a 56-year-old Navy veteran.
He was good, he was harmless, very noisy, because my room was below his. I used to have to tell him on a few occasions. But yeah, he was perfect. Very caring, very caring. We'd have a drink together, me and John would. She kind of joined in on our drinking. Sometimes she'd be nice to him, but as the drinking went on, she'd start being nasty. Like I said, starting to say, I'm going to get rid of you, all that. And she'd be like, give me your money.
Dennehy's threats against John Chapman will soon escalate with terrible consequences.
Dennehy is learning that she can snare any man with her apparent charm and magnetism. She exploits this.
She now turns her attention to 31-year-old Polish man Łukasz Slabosiewski, a warehouse clerk she met in town. The 2 have got to know each other through a shared interest in drink and drugs.
He had told his friends that he had met a lovely English girlfriend, and she had been messaging him and started to develop what he thought was a romantic relationship between the 2.
After sending a series of suggestive text messages, Dennehy invites Łukasz to her house. He heads there, hoping for sex with his new girlfriend. What happens next is the stuff of nightmares. Once he's inside, Dennehy launches a frenzied knife attack on the unsuspecting Łukasz.
I think she stabbed him many times, and then she hid him in a wheelie bin, and she actually showed him to a 15-year-old girl.
Dennehy has a problem: how to get rid of the body. She decides to bring in some muscle and calls an old friend, a 7'3" giant of a man known as Gary Stretch. Stretch has a history of petty theft and burglary. Dennehy uses her charm on him and he falls under her spell. Reportedly, he used to follow her around as if he was a puppy and Dennehy his master.
Together they set about finding a car because she's realised that she's going to need a way to transport and dispose of this body.
A few days later, Dennehy and Gary Stretch buy a Vauxhall Astra, dubbed the Hearse, and they use it to dump Łukasz's body in the fens on the outskirts of Peterborough.
The first murder, it's quite interesting that the disposal was in a quite banal way in a wheelie bin.
Not only did she cast this poor guy out as a bit of rubbish in the wheelie bin, she actually showed a friend of hers the body in the wheelie bin as was. So it wasn't like that she was concerned about having murdered somebody. It was just the normal to her.
So she wasn't really going to any great efforts to conceal the fact she'd murdered. In fact, she was already using it as a boast, as part of her reputation and as part of a badge of honour, something to add to her status.
Yes, so I think her actions afterwards and showing the body to another person, I think, demonstrates that she saw it as an achievement. So not only did she gain pleasure from the act of killing this poor victim, but she then was able to use it as a sign of an achievement.
This was a thrill. She was enjoying it, and she wanted to do it again.
Joanna Dennehy has brutally stabbed Łukasz Slabosiewski and disposed of his body in a lonely country ditch. Over the next few days, she goes about her business as if nothing has happened. But drug and alcohol addict Dennehy has a new addiction: killing,
10 days later, and Dennehy strikes again. In the early hours of Friday morning, she murders her housemate, John Chapman.
So John Chapman was a Falklands veteran that lived in the same bedsit as Dennehy.
Before Dennehy attacked him, 56-year-old John Chapman had been taking drugs and drinking. He would have had little chance to defend himself.
He was vulnerable without being asleep and drinking. He was an old man. You just don't do it.
She stabbed him once in the neck and then 5 times in the chest, ultimately killing him.
Dennehy later claimed that John Chapman had stared at her while she was washing in a shared bathroom. It appears she had no remorse.
She got in contact with Gary Stretch again, and she simply sent him a text saying, "Oops, I did it again."
Dennehy persuades another housemate, Leslie Layton, to become an accomplice, and he and Stretch callously dump Chapman's body in the same ditch as Slabashewski's. At about the same time, Dennehy's landlord and lover, Kevin Lee, is in town buying her an Easter present. He meets a friend and confides in him that Dennehy wants to dress me up and rape me. A few hours later, Dennehy and Kevin Lee meet up at her house for drinks. No sooner is he through the door, she stabs him in the heart. Her third murder in 10 days. Yet again, accomplices Stretch and Layton help her dispose of the body.
She burnt his car, and then she took Kevin Lee's body. She put him into a black sequin dress and drove out to the fen ditches, where she then disposed of his body as well.
Kevin Lee is found the next day. Police believe the dress was an act of post-death humiliation.
You know, in dumping the body in that way, it was described as a final insult. It was positioned in that way. I don't believe we can ever be sure of that, but clearly there was that sexual motivation going back to that attitude of Joanna that she wanted to humiliate.
She had now killed 2 people, both well known to her, one a potential lover and one a housemate. And she appears, as you say, to be compulsively attached to the process and mechanics of murder.
It was a compulsion, and she gained so much satisfaction out of her actions that she felt the need to continue to engage in those actions.
She was happy to let everyone know that she, in relation to violence, she knew no boundaries, had no restraints.
Yes, she wasn't fazed by the first murder at all. In fact, she had a zest and almost a taste for it now.
What was the time gap between Lucas's murder and her next homicide?
It was around 10 days, around the 29th of March. Dennehy murdered John in much the same fashion, with a knife through the heart.
And now she arranged to meet Kevin Lee for sex.
Yes.
And the scene which was left behind was one of absolute carnage. This seemed to be the most violent of all the murders, and perhaps spoke more about Joanna than any of the other incidents.
Yes, and what also spoke to the state of her mind was the way she disposed of the body. So she disposed of the body in what could be said to be a symbolic or a symbolic display of humiliation and a lack of regard.
It appeared there was an absolute expectation that the body would be found, expectation and hope.
Yes, one would assume that she displayed the body in that way so that it would be observed by those who found it, or it doesn't give the impression that she was trying to conceal her acts. This is not chaotic behaviour. This is someone who really is quite calm and is not emotionally troubled by what they have done.
And at what stage do we think there's a mental illness creeping in here?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a mental illness, but it's certainly a significant disturbance of her psychological functioning. I think in light of knowing what had occurred in these 3 killings, we can now assume that that psychological disturbance is likely to have been there for some time but it's only now that it's really emerging.
Police discovered phone data linking Dennehy to Kevin Lee. And when they attended the property, they discovered blood spatter everywhere.
As soon as they discover that Kevin Lee's body has been found, Dennehy and Stretch go on the run.
We know that she, at some stage, went to Norfolk. There was a burglary committed where an Olympus camera was stolen. And that camera became a crucial piece of evidence for our inquiry in West Mercia, because it was recovered and showed then the journey that they took across the country, from Norfolk, then to Herefordshire.
Dennehy isn't making much effort to cover her tracks, but she still manages to evade police for 2 more days.
She is reported to have said that she wanted to have as many victims as 9. And while she is driving through Hereford with Gary Stretch in the car, she decides that she wants to jump out and, I think she said, have a bit more fun.
In Hereford, she randomly stabs 2 more men, Robin Bereza and John Rogers.
And then Joanna Dennehy gets out of the front passenger seat and walks behind Robin Bereza and very calmly attacks him from the rear. He said he felt, a punch on the back shoulder. Well, the punch was actually him being stabbed, and he was stabbed through and punctured his lung. Joanna keeps attacking him. And we believe the attack was only stalled by the fact that there was a passing motorist, and she then got back into the Vauxhall Astra. And this is all happening at about 3:30 in the afternoon in broad daylight in Hereford.
Dennehy jumps back into the car and tells Stretch to find another victim. John Rogers was the victim of her next random attack.
I think Stretch says, "Will he do?" And she gets out of the car and approaches Mr. Rogers from behind and then attacks again. And he suffered over 30 knife wounds, punctured lungs, punctured vital organs, defensive wounds to arms. Police are responding to now 2 random knife attacks in Hereford.
The police know the car she's in and quickly track her down.
And the police bravely approach the vehicle. She puts up absolutely no resistance. She's told to get on the floor, handcuffed and arrested.
Her accomplice, Gary Stretch, has fled the scene. But it's almost as if Joanna Dennehy wants to be arrested. Miraculously, both victims of her random stabbings survive. And in Peterborough, the bodies of her first 2 victims are found.
The day after Dennehy was arrested was when a farmer actually came across the bodies in the field ditches around Peterborough. To find 3 bodies of 3 men that have been disposed of with such disregard, it really did send shockwaves through the community of Peterborough.
So she now goes on the run. She sees her name as a person of interest on the news.
Yeah, which she's absolutely delighted about. They describe her as a monster, not to be approached, and she's absolutely over the moon.
This is everything she's wanted for her. This is her ultimate catharsis, that sexual thrill.
Well, it's sexual and an extreme enhancement of her status as a very dangerous person.
Do you think there's anything significant in the fact that all her victims are men?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it can be seen as one of two ways. A hatred of men, but I'm not really sure about that one. But interestingly, to coerce men to do as she sees fit is probably more difficult, more of a challenge to her than coercing women, who are by nature much more gentler.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's possible that there was a hatred of men, but it's also possible with someone with this sort of emotional profile that she doesn't even experience emotions of that sort, that it's not hatred-driven. This is excitement, sensation-seeking, and she may have gained more satisfaction, more achievement, greater thrill, being able to overpower and kill a male than she would have done for a female.
This was a goal-orientated kind of exercise. The challenge to kill a man was so much greater than that to kill a woman.
Yes, that's a strong possibility.
Joanna Dennehy has murdered 3 men and attempted to kill 2 others. Her 10-day killing spree comes to an end when, after a nationwide manhunt, she and her accomplices are arrested.
Dennehy was taken to Hereford Police Station. Her accomplice, Gary Stretch, was picked up soon after. Paul Williamson was the senior investigating officer assigned to the Hereford stabbings.
She is immediately taken to the custody block at Hereford Police Station.
CCTV footage reveals that Dennehy appears cool, calm and collected.
Joanna Christina Dennehy.
But importantly, the suspect is assessed as whether they are fit to detain in a police station and fit to interview. The outcome of that was she was not. So she was sectioned under what we call Section 2 of the Mental Health Act. What that means is that the period of police custody will stop and you are transferred then to a secure mental health institution for more thorough assessment.
Right, so 1 out of 4, attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Could be worse.
Where there are psychiatric issues, then very often they need to be monitored over a period of time to determine whether they're fit to stand trial in the long term. So being sectioned allows the mental health services to contribute to what should or should not happen to that individual within the framework of the unfolding criminal justice process.
Dennehy is transferred to Britain's most secure prison for women, Her Majesty's Prison Bronzefield in Surrey. But she's still a danger. She hatches a violent escape plan.
There was a plot discovered for her to try and escape. The plan was to kill a prison security guard and then use one of their thumbs for the biometric security.
She developed that real psychopathic sort of look. I would not have ever turned my back on her in a room anywhere, or been in a room with her at any time. She just changed completely. She became, I don't know, she was very cold, calculated, and I would say yes, she was evil.
Dennehy is held on remand. 7 months later, she attends what's known as an arraignment, a court proceeding in which the defendant is asked to enter a plea. Dennehy makes a surprise announcement.
Joanna Dennehy shocked everyone, including her defence counsel, by pleading guilty to the 3 murders and the 2 attempt murders. As I say, I and others actually have commented upon the fact that we believe that is her last attempt to exercise control over the situation.
During her trial, it came out that she gained pleasure from sadomasochism, from hurting people, which may have driven her to hurt people. However, her actual motive for killing, she didn't necessarily seem to have a clear one.
If Dennehy's defence had pleaded manslaughter due to diminished responsibility, she could have been sentenced to secure psychiatric care. But because she pleads guilty to murder, she will now be sent to a general prison.
Very, very uncommon for defendants to plead guilty to murder. I would say it happens once in a blue moon, and that's because the sentence is very tough and people don't want to be spending the rest of their lives or substantial parts of their lives in prison. So most people contest. I have had experience of pleas of guilty to murder, but to put that in context, that's one case in hundreds.
In February 2014, Joanna Dennehy is sentenced to life in prison. But even at her trial, she shows no remorse.
During her sentencing at the Old Bailey, when Joanna Dennehy was being called a cruel, calculating, selfish and manipulative killer, as she was being sentenced, Dennehy actually went on to laugh and smirk during the proceedings.
Dennehy's accomplice, Gary Stretch, is also convicted to life imprisonment with a recommended minimum term of 19 years, while Leslie Layton receives 14 years.
Dennehy's violent behaviour escalates, culminating in a killing spree in which she murders 3 men over a 10-day period. Were there red flags in her early teens that were missed? And could these tragic murders have been prevented?
So she presented so oddly when she was initially arrested that officers rightly sent her for a psych assessment.
Yes, I think that would be, in these circumstances, I think that would be a normal course of events. It would be a series of assessments at a mental health facility.
She was diagnosed with other conditions aside from just the antisocial personality disorder.
And what additional diagnosis was she given?
She was diagnosed with a sadomasochistic disorder, emotionally unstable personality disorder, and psychopathic disorder.
So if you bring us through those 3 additional disorders and how they might coalesce to make them so dangerous.
So the sadomasochistic disorder, so she gained excitement, she gained thrill, possibly sexual excitement from harming herself and harming others. The emotionally unstable personality disorder, so her mood was dysregulated. It wasn't in control. Her mood would be up and down. And the psychopathy is a reflection of her lack of concern with the suffering and the emotional perspective of others.
A diary of hers was found to contain details of a possible escape attempt where she was going to murder a member of staff and cut their finger off to enable her to use the biometrics and therefore open doors and make good her escape.
It's interesting is that you are in a highly regulated and secure environment and you write a diary with an escape plan, and I'm not too sure she was terribly disappointed when the plan was found.
No, so it could both have been an expression of a real desire to carry out this act, but also to convey to others and the authorities, in this case the prison authorities, what she's capable of doing.
What significance do you give her guilty pleas to all offences?
On the one hand, she knows that the evidence is stacked against her, but also that, and she acknowledges this, that she expresses no remorse. She's not troubled by what she's done. So again, this is partly her wanting to, in some sense, take credit for what she's done.
She's taken ownership. The last thing she wants anyone else to kind of suggest that they were real accomplices on this.
Yes, absolutely. She wanted to say, no, I did these. Yes, I had helped to dispose of the bodies, but actually the murders, that was down to me. The stabbings, that was down to me. She was proud of what she'd completed and achieved.
When we look back upon the Joanna Dennehy tragedy, is there anything that could have saved any of these people's lives?
I'm not sure that there's anything that could have been done to predict what was going to happen, and I'm pretty sure that it would be almost impossible to predict. The interventions for the sort of problems that she was displaying wouldn't necessarily have prevented these tragic outcomes.
As you say, I don't think this could have been predicted. But there were 1 or 2 witnesses who, if they'd stepped up in the shocking moment when a body was being disposed of, then 2 of their lives could have been saved.
Joanna Dennehy picks her victims and her assists very well. She knows that the people she picks are going to do as they're told because she rules by violence.
So in the round, I think we can say there was little or nothing anybody could have done to have prevented this incredibly rare, unique murderer from her compulsion.
I would agree with that, yes.
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
So there's no indication she was a ticking time bomb, but once she did ignite, once she had her first kill, it was only a matter of time before she killed and killed again. If she wasn't caught within a couple of days, what would have happened?
So all the indication is that she would have continued to try and satisfy that compulsion.
How dangerous do you think she is in prison?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I think she's probably a 12.
Joanna Dennehy is one of only 3 women to receive a whole life tariff because of the shocking gravity of her crimes. The sadistic pleasure she took in killing has made it impossible to rehabilitate her safely. But perhaps, if she'd received sufficient mental health support in her early teens, then this terrible killing spree could have been prevented.